The Toyota GR86, formerly known as the Toyota 86, formerly known as the Scion FRS, and also known as the Subaru BRZ, is collectively one of the most misunderstood performance vehicles in America, and a perfect example of why sometimes the best vehicle is not the right vehicle for everybody, because this is an absolute blast. It's a hoot and a half to drive, and I absolutely love it, but I probably would not buy one. To understand the GR86, I think the first thing we need to do is take this out on the road, so we're going to go about things a little bit differently than usual. Out on the road, you'll instantly notice the different torque curve out of this engine and, of course, the extra power that we get. There's no longer that weird torque sag that we had in the 2-liter model. 0 to 60 times are faster, but not as fast as some people might want. This automatic transmission model went 0 to 60 in 6.5 seconds. My best time in the manual transmission model at the launch event was right around 6 seconds, because I didn't want to roast the clutch. If you are willing to roast the clutch, you might get down to 5.6 or maybe even 5.5 seconds if you really tried, but keep in mind that your clutch is going to suffer lifetime as a result. This is not the kind of vehicle that's focused on quick 0 to 60 acceleration. If that's what you're after, you're probably going to find a faster 0 to 60 time in the base version of the upcoming Mustang for 2024. That, of course, has a more powerful 2.3-liter turbo, a 10-speed automatic transmission, no manual, unfortunately, but it probably is going to get you quicker 0 to 60. As far as 0 to 60 times go, this is right in line with the MX-5 for most drivers, I would say. The manual transmission, obviously, it's going to be how good you are at shifting the manual. This is about 400 pounds heavier than the Mazda, but interestingly, I think this is just a better feeling vehicle. You can certainly hear more of that engine whether you want to or not. I like the way this engine sounds. This definitely is the kind of vehicle that you want to rev up and have a lot of fun with, but the manual transmission mode, I think it could be a little bit better in this automatic transmission. If I were shopping for the GR86, I would get the manual every time. Even though the 0 to 60 times are not going to be as predictable, this is one of the few modern sports cars where the manual is actually going to be faster. That's not the case for a lot of the competition, but here it certainly is. And I think that's because the 6-speed automatic, sometimes it feels a little bit lazy. It's definitely better tuned than before, but it's not as sharp as I would like, not as quick shifting as the newer transmissions that we find in the Camaro or the Mustang, but I would say better than what we see in the automatic transmission version of the MX-5. Now, all the vehicles I've talked about so far are going to have traditional automatic transmissions, so these are not going to be as quick shifting as some of the front-wheel drive hot hatches or performance sedans that you'll see out there, like an Elantra N or a GTI or a Golf R, etc. Those dual clutch transmissions are going to shift faster, but they're not the same thing as the GR86 because they're not rear-wheel drive and they don't have the kind of engagement and the kind of fun that we find in this vehicle. In my braking test, this vehicle managed to stop from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in just 105 feet, but I did notice that the brakes can start to get a little fadey after repeated stops. So if you do want to track your GR86, the brakes are the thing you're going to want to attend to. But for your average weekend mountain trip like this, it's going to be just fine. And for your daily commute, absolutely no worries. This stops very short. And that short stopping distance and improved grip are definitely hallmarks of the updated GR86. Handling is greatly improved. I don't have access to a skid pad, but I know folks that do, and this has recently pulled 1G in the automatic transmission version, which is absolutely insane. Just slightly below that with the manual transmission, likely because of the weight balance for the two vehicles. This handles incredibly well, and the absolute levels of grip appear to be a little bit better than the MX-5 or most versions, again comparably priced, versus the Ford Mustang or Camaro. But handling is more than just absolute grip. It's also about the way this vehicle feels. The steering is really quick, it's communicative, it's easy to tell exactly what's going on, and because this is rear-wheel drive and has just two 15-width tires on it, it's pretty easy to get that rear end to swing out on you, which is exactly what I want in an inexpensive, fun vehicle. Decent amount of grip, but also the ability to steer a little bit with your right foot if you're interested in doing that. Now, not everybody is going to appreciate the way a rear-wheel drive car feels. This can get squirrely on slick pavement, on ice, on snow, etc., but this is an awful lot of fun if you're interested in it. And that's why, again, this is sort of baby's first track car. This is the kind of vehicle that's designed to help people explore rear-wheel drive dynamics at lower speeds before they want to graduate up into something like a Supra, or maybe a Mustang GT, or a Camaro SS or something like that. To get the same sort of rear-end stepping out feel in those vehicles versus this, the speeds are going to have to be much higher because the tires are bigger. There's more grip going on. Those vehicles will do things this absolutely cannot, but if you're just learning, you're just starting out, you're going to find yourself in a tire wall long before you would do that in this. And of course, if you want less expensive fun, if you're interested in autocross, things like that, this is a much more appropriate vehicle because you can get, again, those rear-wheel drive dynamics at lower speeds. You can have a lot of fun. It's really noticeable out on winding roads like this. This is just a joy to drive in a way that the MX-5 honestly is not at this point in time. When it comes to handling, I'm going to give this an absolute A, not just because of the grip numbers, which are excellent, but because of the feel. This has kind of darty steering, I'm honest. If you don't like that, and if you're just daily commuting it on boring roads, you're probably not going to want this. It can be a little bit quick, but I think it's exactly where the GR86 needs to be for the level of fun we have in here. This is much more engaging, much more fun than even a new Nissan Z, I would say, but a different kind of fun. Handling and ride quality are often two ends of the teeter-totter, and this is certainly focusing on handling ability, and the ride quality does suffer as a result. Out on this gravel road that I'm on here, I'm going to give the ride quality a C. This is certainly less compliant than the MX-5 or the comparably priced versions of the Mustang or Camaro. Not quite the same sort of thing as this, but obviously direct competitors, especially the Mustang. For 2024, we don't know exact pricing of that model just yet, as I said before, but it's likely going to be pretty similar to this as far as its starting MSRP, but it's a bigger, heavier vehicle with more power, a more softly tuned suspension. It's not going to handle quite like this, but it is going to be more comfortable and give you probably better 0 to 60 times. As far as ride quality goes, the MX-5 is the better daily driver, and theoretically that daily driving mission is the mission of both of these vehicles. This is targeted at the shopper that can only afford one car or simply only wants one car to do the daily commute, to do fun mountain twisties on your weekend, and occasionally maybe do an autocross or a track event, something like that. The MX-5 is better at that mission because, generally speaking, we spend more time commuting than time on the track. This is more track-focused, more fun road-focused than the MX-5, and as a result, simply more fun than the MX-5, but there is that penalty, and it's ride quality. Now, when it comes to cabin noise, there is a bit of a problem in the GR86. This cabin is pretty loud. I measured 74 decibels at 50 miles an hour, so I'm going to have to give this a C-. This is louder than pretty much any of the competition. You will definitely find a quieter cabin in, any of the front-wheel drive options. Definitely a quieter cabin, even in a Mustang or a Camaro convertible. Definitely you have to keep in mind the lightweight mission of the GR86, and there are compromises as a result. One of those is cabin noise. Now, on the upside, fuel economy has been excellent. I've been averaging 26 miles per gallon over a week of mixed driving, and that's definitely good considering how hard I've been driving the GR86. Bottom line out on the road, the GR86 is an absolute hoot and a half to drive. This is so engaging. It is so much fun, even with the automatic transmission, which is not exactly my favorite. I would take pretty much anybody's automatic transmission over this, except for the one that we find in the MX-5, which is likely somewhat related to this, since that is also an Aisin transmission, but this one shifts better than that one. But if I were simply talking about transmissions, I would take anybody's dual clutch, I would take the 10-speed autos, etc. over this. The problem is that they're attached to the rest of the car, and it's not just about transmissions. Even with this automatic, this is simply more fun and more engaging than the Mustang or Camaro. Even the top-end versions of the Mustang. Unfortunately, it's a different kind of engagement and a different kind of enjoyment than you find in those expensive performance machines, and that's probably why this is not the best fit for everybody. A decent portion of the automotive buying public is a little bit more interested in 0 to 60 times than quick steering and nimble handling, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If that's your preference, that is just fine. And I have to admit, part of me says that that is what I would prefer, because there is something really pleasing about the swift 0 to 60 times we find in the Mustang lineup. The slightly better tuned suspension, it's definitely going to be a bit more livable, a bit more comfortable for your daily drive. And then there is, of course, the rest of the vehicle. Just as the rest of the vehicle has to be attached to a transmission, the excellent drivetrain that we have in here and the fun steering rack and the nimble everythings, it's attached to the rest of the GR86, which we need to talk about now. In addition to the light curb weight, the tight dimensions of the GR86 are key to why this is so much fun out on the road. And the Boxer engine that we're going to talk about in a bit is also key to this really low slung profile. You can really see how low the front end of the GR86 is. It gives it this very distinctive look. Up here we have full LED headlights, and even back here at this end of the hood, you can see it comes just up to my thigh there. This is a very, very low to the ground vehicle. And as a result, it's not easy to get in and out of. Dimensionally, the GR86 slots between something like a Camaro and a Mustang that have more usable back seats, although I still wouldn't call them generous, and something like the Mazda MX-5 that has no back seat at all. Now, if I open this door, you'll notice how low the opening is, but the floor in there is actually several inches lower than the opening. And that's part of why this is a little difficult to get in and out of. You can see how low the roofline really is. And that's because the mission of the GR86 was to have an incredibly low center of gravity. That's achieved by that really low seating position, the really low roofline, and then of course the Boxer engine under the hood. As with many performance cars, this definitely has a bit of a wedge profile. This ducktail spoiler, which is pretty large, is significantly higher off the ground than the very front of the vehicle. And it sort of gives me a little bit of a Supra vibe back here from some angles. Although logically an awful lot of Subaru vibes because again of the coordinated development of this and the BRZ. We're going to talk about that in a bit. Back here we have LED taillight modules, dual exhausts, and then we find the backup lights right down there at the bottom. The drivetrain in the GR86 is a little unusual. This is a 2.4-liter Boxer engine. Now, Boxer engines in their own right are somewhat unusual because really only Porsche and Subaru use them, and this is one of the very few times that you'll ever see a Boxer engine up front in a rear-wheel drive vehicle. The rest of the Subaru lineup in North America, they're all-wheel drive. And of course, Porsche puts the engine in the back when they're using Boxer engines for the most part. So this is really, really unusual. But it's also unusual because this has Toyota's direct injection system on a Subaru engine. Total horsepower comes in at 228, torque at 184 pound-feet. Now, the reason they went with the Boxer engine was, of course, because Subaru has a lot of Boxers, but also because they wanted to lower the center of gravity in the vehicle. An inline engine with the cylinders all in a little vertical row and rear-wheel drive would have made for a relatively tall engine. And that's why in a lot of performance vehicles we find the engine tilted towards the side, sort of like a slant engine. That's what Chrysler used to call them. But modern BMWs, they're also tilted so that way the hood isn't quite so high. In this, the engine is very wide, but really quite low in terms of its vertical height, and that really helps give this that low profile. Now, interesting twist, Boxer engines tend to be a little bit more complicated than inline engines. The Subaru Boxers have also had some reputation for leaking oil a bit just because of their general design, and they can be a little bit heavier than inline engines, but it really gives you that low center of gravity. There are two transmissions on offer. There's a manual transmission and there's an automatic. Again, this one has the automatic transmission. Versus the outgoing 2-liter Boxer engine that we found in the Toyota 86, this engine gives you more power and, more importantly, a much better torque curve. The previous engine had a weird fall off in the torque curve. This now does not. This actually feels much more linear, and of course more torque happens at higher RPMs, which really makes this more engaging and a bit more appropriate for North America. Aside from the low step in height, front seat comfort is pretty comparable to the Mazda and definitely a little below the Mustang and Camaro in my opinion. We have a fully manual seat design over here for the driver in this model. Manual recline, manual slide forward and backward. If you're a taller person, you should know that this is as far as the front seats go back. So I would suspect someone maybe with legs that are maybe an inch longer than me might work in here. I have about an inch of extra headroom left as well, but people that are much taller, they're gonna not really fit in here. Also, if you wanna do track stuff with your vehicle and you go someplace that makes you have a helmet, I'm about as tall as you can possibly fit in here with a helmet, and I do have to kind of crunch down a little bit in order to make that work. Now, in theory, the GR86 has a back seat. Let's see how that really works in practice. The back seat is fairly small. Yeah, really not a lot of headroom going on there. And I would have to, let's see, cross my legs back here if I were to put that seat in anything that was remotely comfortable for me up front. And as you can see, you really just could not use the back seat. I suspect also because of the dimensions back here, it would be pretty difficult to put a lot of child seats back here as well. So you should really consider this rear area as either nicely padded luggage storage area, or you could fold these seats down and then put cargo back here from the trunk. So perhaps for track days, this is going to be more convenient than something like an MX-5, because you could put a spare set of tires in here and in the trunk, and you couldn't do that in the MX-5. But as a passenger carrying conveyance, this is definitely not ideal. Also not quite ideal, this is a 100% folding seat back rather than a 50-50 or 60-40 design. The trunk is certainly not the largest that I've ever experienced, but I was able to barely squeeze two 24-inch roller bags back here. And if I go under the load floor, you can see that there's room for your can of Fix-A-Flat, things like that. It is sort of shaped like a spare tire, but we do not find a spare tire. However, we do have the mounting point for most likely a compact spare tire. I would suspect you should be able to find something aftermarket that might work if you really wanted a spare. Otherwise, I'm surprised that Toyota did not just give us a bigger and somewhat unusually shaped trunk. As we take a look around the interior, obviously there's a lot of Subaru in here, including Subaru's EyeSight safety system rather than the radar-based system that we find in most Toyotas. The decision to share equipment was obviously logical in order to keep the price tag low. No moonroof or anything like that here. You can see that the ceiling kind of dishes in to give the passenger and the driver a little bit of extra headroom, but you'll notice that if you are taller and you put the seat in that rearward position, that you don't actually benefit from that slight dish there. So if you're shorter and you're wearing a helmet, maybe that would help, but taller people probably not. We have adjustable height shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, and a combination of imitation suede and leather upholstery in here. You can see the fixed shoulder belts for the front and rear passengers there. These seats are perforated, but the seats are just heated, they're not ventilated. As you can see, the bolstering is pretty aggressive, and I found it pretty comfortable as far as the bolstering goes for someone of my size, but I do really wish these seats had adjustable lumbar support, at least for the driver. That's not something that we find in this model. Moving over to the front of the door, we find a bottle holder down there. Dashboard styling that gives me a little bit of a combination of Toyota and Subaru vibe, especially with these air vents here. They definitely look like Toyota parts. But down here we find a fairly large glove compartment. I was easily able to fit a large tablet computer inside. In the middle of the dash, we find Subaru's latest infotainment software, so not the same that we would find in the modern Toyota lineup. It is pretty capable, it's pretty snappy as well, but it's not quite as feature-rich as the system that we find in the newest Toyotas. There's a GR button right there for starting the engine, dual-zone automatic climate control. That is quite a nice touch in here. Below we have a row of buttons related to the climate control. The automatic transmission has a manual mode. You engage that by moving the shifter over to the driver's side. You then push away from the driver for gear up, or you can use the paddles on the back of the wheel. We then have a manual handbrake back there, and then a button for the traction control system to enable and disable it, sport mode, snow mode, and then track mode over here. We press and hold that, and it basically turns all the nannies on the vehicle off. We then have controls for the front heated seats, a small cup holder there, and then two large cup holders right there under that bifold door. But that's also where we find the USB input for the infotainment system. So I suspect a lot of folks are probably just gonna keep their phone in there, or you have to have that cable kind of coming out the front. And then of course, if the cable's coming out the front, you don't really have anywhere to put your phone because there's really no storage going on here, because that's exactly where the transmission is living. Over on the driver's side, we find a partial LCD instrument cluster. Right now, the vehicle is in track mode, so you can see that we have that large and very present tachometer right there in the middle. The LCD is only the left side of the screen. This small right side over there, that's a separate LED display. So if I take it out of track mode and I just put it in the regular sport mode, you can see that the display changes there. It also has some startup animations that definitely make the display attractive. So if I go ahead and start the vehicle up again, you can see that the LED display and the LCD coordinate with one another to give you that sort of box or engine vibe there. Moving out from there, we find the very Subaru Toyota steering wheel here. We have the cruise control stock over here on this side, big Toyota logo there, some buttons that definitely look like a blend of things, and then paddle shifters right there on the back. As far as parts bin content goes, this is definitely much more of a blend between Toyota and Subaru than the Supra is a blend of Toyota and BMW. That's really all BMW. And in here we do find a bit of both. And lastly, we need to talk about the price tag, which is pretty reasonable for the GR86. This starts under $28,000, and as equipped, this one is $33,250. The problem is, there are a lot of really great cars out there that also are in this $28,000 to $33,000 price range. Depending on exactly how far above that you want to go, you could logically compare this against a wide variety of performance things, from a Golf R that's definitely going to be more expensive to perhaps an Elantra N, which is certainly going to be more practical than this because it's going to have an actual back seat, 2 extra doors, but it's not going to be as much fun. Now, the trouble in my mind, mostly for the GR86, is that the current generation Mustang, and that would be not the new one that they just released, but the one that's on sale right now, that is about the same starting price as this, and it will get a lot more expensive, but for the starting price, you get a lot more power. You get a 2.3 liter turbocharged engine under the hood, and for 2024, that's going to be well over 300 horsepower, and the 10-speed auto is going to be standard. So even if the 2024 Mustang, the base one, ends up $2,000 more expensive than this starting, you get a lot of standard equipment, a much more powerful engine, and a much roomier interior. Now, there are pros and cons. That all makes the Mustang less fun than this in a lot of ways. The base model, fast 0 to 60, decent 60 to 0 times and distances. But as far as the fun to drive nature, this is simply more fun than the current generation Mustang. The trouble is, with all the compromises required to make this that much fun, the light curb weight, the low slung nature of it, the really compact dimensions, which one is the right vehicle for you? That is really tricky. And if my money were on the line, I have to admit, I would probably buy the Mustang, even though I think this is a better vehicle in many ways. Let me know what you think about that. Would you get this? Would you be interested in the quicker acceleration times, giving up some of that steering and handling feel for the quicker times, and of course the roomier cabin? Or would you want the purity that we find in the GR86 and of course the BRZ as well? Let me know down there in the comment section. Find me over at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all those other social places, and I'll see all of you next week.